stuff," said the king. It was just after this adventure that we had encountered a continent of immense extent and prodigious solidity, but which nevertheless was supported entirely upon the back of a sky-blue cow that had no fewer than 400 horns. "That, now, I believe," said the king, "because I have read something of the kind before in a book." We passed immediately beneath this continent, swimming in between the legs of the cow, and after some hours found ourselves in a wonderful country indeed, which I was informed by the man-animal was his own native land, inhabited by things of his own species. This elevated the man-animal very much in my esteem, and in fact, I now began to feel ashamed of the contemptuous familiarity with which I had treated him, for I now found that the man-animals in general were a nation of the most powerful magicians, who lived with worms in their brain, and which no doubt served to stimulate them by their painful writhings and wrigglings to the most miraculous efforts of imagination. "Nonsense," said the king. Among the magicians were domesticated several animals of very singular kinds. For example, there was a huge horse whose bones were iron and whose blood was boiling water. In place of corn, he had black stones for his usual food, and yet, in spite of so hard a diet, he was so strong and swift that he could drag a load more weighty than the grandest temple in the city, at a rate surpassing that of the flight of most birds. "Twaddle," said the king. I saw also among these people a hen without feathers, but bigger than a camel. Instead of flesh and bone, she had iron and brick. Her blood, like that of the horse, to whom in fact she was nearly related, was boiling water, and like him she ate nothing but wood or black stones. This hen brought forth very frequently 100 chickens in a day, and after birth they took up their residence for several weeks within the stomach of their mother. "Fal lal," said the king. One of this nation of mighty conjurers created a man out of brass and wood and leather, and endowed him with such ingenuity that he would have beaten at chess all the race of mankind, with the exception of the great Caliph Harun al-Rashid. Another of these magi constructed of like material a creature that put to shame even the genius of him who made it, for so great were its reasoning powers that in a second it performed calculations of so vast an extent that they would have required the united labor of 50,000 fleshy men for a year. But still more wonderful, a conjurer fashioned for himself a mighty thing that was neither man nor beast, but which had brains of lead, intermixed with a black matter like pitch, and fingers were then employed with such incredible speed and dexterity that it would have had no trouble in writing out 20,000 copies of the Quran in an hour, and this with so exquisite a precision that in all the copies there should not be found one to vary from another by the breadth of the finest hair. This thing was of a prodigious strength, so that it erected or so overthrew the mightiest empires at a breath, but his powers were exercised equally for evil and for good. "Ridiculous," said the king. Among this nation of necromancers, there was also one who had in his veins the blood of the salamanders, for he made no scruple of sitting down to smoke his chibuk in a red-hot oven until his dinner was thoroughly roasted upon his floor. Another had the faculty of converting the common metals into gold, without even looking at them during the process. Another had such delicacy of touch that he made a wire so fine as to be invisible. Another had such quickness of perception that he counted all the separate motions of the elastic body, while it was springing backward and forward at the rate of 900 millions of times in a second. "Absurd," said the king. Another of these musicians by means of a fluid that nobody ever yet saw, could make the corpses of his friends brandish their arms, kick out their legs, fight, or even get up and dance at his will. Another had cultivated his voice to so great an extent that it could have made himself heard from one end of the world to the other. Another had so long an arm that he could sit down in Damascus and indite a letter to Baghdad, or indeed at any distance whatsoever. Another commanded the lightning to come down to him out of the heavens, and it came at his call, and it served him for a plaything when it came. Another took two loud sounds out of them and made a silence. Another constructed a deep darkness out of two brilliant lights. Another made ice in a red-hot furnace. Another directed the sun and painted his portrait, and the sun did. Another took this luminary with the moon and the planets, and having first weighed them with his scrupulous accuracy, probed them into their depths, and found out the solidity of the substance with which they are made. But the whole nation is indeed of so surprising a necromantic ability that not even their infants, nor even their commonest cats and dogs, have any difficulty in seeing objects that do not exist at all, or that for 20 million of creatures before the birth of the nation itself have been blotted out from the face of creation. Preposterous, said the king. The wives and daughters of these incomparably great and wise magi, continued Scheherazade, without being in any manner disturbed by these frequent and most ungentlemanly interruptions on the part of her husband. The wives and daughters of these eminent conjurers are everything that is accomplished and refined, and would be everything that is interesting and beautiful, but for an unhappy fatality that besets them, and from which not even the miraculous powers their husbands and fathers had hitherto been adequate to save. Some fatalities come in certain shapes and some in others, but this, of which I speak, has come in the shape of a crotchet. A what? Said the king. A crotchet, said Scheherazade. One of the evil genii, who are perpetually upon the watch to inflict ill, has put it into their heads of these accomplished ladies that the thing which we describe as personal beauty consists altogether in the protuberance of the region which lies not very far below the small of the back. Perfection of loveliness, they say, is in the direct ratio of the extent of this lump. Having been long possessed of this idea, and bolsters being cheap in that country, the days have long gone by since it was possible to distinguish a woman from a very dromedary. Stop, said the king. I can't stand that, and I won't. You've already given me a dreadful headache with your lies. The day, too, I perceive, is beginning to break. How long have we been married? My conscience is getting to be troublesome again, and that dromedary touch. Do you take me for a fool? Upon the whole, you might as well get up and be throttled. These words, as I learned from the Is It or Not, both grieved and astonished Scheherazade, but as she knew the king to be a man of scrupulous integrity, and quite unlucky to forfeit his word, she submitted to her fate with a good grace. She derived, however, great consolation during the tightening of the bowstring from the reflection that much of the history remained still untold, and that the petulance of her brute of a husband had reaped for him a most righteous reward, and depriving him of many inconceivable adventures.